Welcome to Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. A world where coming in second place is not an option, but where principle-centered winning is the only approach.
Good morning and welcome back to Government Contracting Weekly, where each week we aim to bring you some insights that will help you win a government contract using the principle-centered approach. This morning is a special morning. It's a pre-election morning, and I'm delighted that with us this morning we have with us Dan Gordon, a leading professor at George Washington University. He served in the White House, he's an expert on government contracting, and he has for us at least some predictions that I think you'll find rather interesting and very useful. Dan, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Hillary.
Dan actually has been at the pinnacle, really, of procurement policy. And if you don't mind, Dan, could you give our audience, in case they don't know your background, a little bit about your background at the White House and what you've been doing and how you actually did transition over to George Washington and what you're doing there at the university now?
Absolutely. Some of your viewers may know that I was at GAO for 17 years and working in the Office of General Counsel there. And then I got a call from the Obama administration asking to talk with me about potentially becoming the administrator for federal procurement policy. Eventually, that went through. The president nominated me, the Senate confirmed me. So I did that for 2 years until I retired from the federal government in December.
Okay. Now, with your retirement, I think it's an advantage you take to George Washington because now you're in the law school there, and you're the only law school in the country, of course, that focuses on government contracting.
We have a program in government procurement law that's been around now for more than 50 years. We're really the only place in North America where you can do a full suite of courses studying government procurement law.
So for our audience, they're probably thinking, now Dan has both sides of the aisle experience, government experience, now obviously you've had industry experience. What would you be able to say to a government contractor watching as to what are some of the challenges you've seen people overcome and how?
If I were talking as a law professor, I would tell companies to be very careful that they're doing everything the government asks for in the solicitation. But if I were stepping back and looking more broadly at what companies need to do to succeed, I would say be focused on what the government needs, be focused on satisfying your customer. I've got to tell you, in my experience, both at GAO and then in the White House, I saw hundreds and hundreds of contractors that just do a terrific job serving government customers well.
But they're not necessarily compliant at the same time. Is that what you're saying, that compliance and customer satisfaction, there's a conflict there?
No, they're just different.
Yes.
You can be a great company, but if you don't know the rules, you won't get the contract if you don't follow the rules.
So you can try to be compliant, but you're not necessarily going to then.
Yeah, you need to both be compliant with the rules and to be focused on serving your customers well. I wish it was simpler, but it isn't.
Dan, we had a previous guest on our program, and she used the analogy that sequestration is like conducting plastic surgery with a chainsaw. You can visualize that and you can feel it at the same time. I think she was very accurate, and our audience probably agrees. What would you say about sequestration? What would you talk to our audience about in terms of what you're seeing? Is it the doomsday that everybody's thinking that it is? Or any advice, and what are you seeing?
A couple of things. First of all, sequestration was meant to be something horrible. I'm not sure if it's quite that image, but it was not meant to be something we would ever do. It was meant to be something so bad that it would force action by Congress and the White House.
But they haven't. It's been delayed back and back.
They have failed. They failed with the super committee. They failed to take any other steps. We almost got to a grand bargain, as they sometimes call it, a year and a half ago now. But they failed, and now we face the specter of this terrible thing beginning to happen in January.
Well, and people talk about the fiscal cliff, that there's a 50% chance of this going through in January, but 100% chance anyway of budget cuts. So what do you advise, actually, when you're at your law school, what do you advise companies to do in light of budget cuts regardless of sequestration? It's
interesting. I don't actually think that sequestration is the problem, and I don't actually think that sequestration is going to happen, and not in that horrible image of the, what was it, the chainsaw?
The chainsaw, plastic surgery with the chainsaw, right.
I am perhaps unreasonably optimistic, but I am optimistic that in fact, after the elections, the tone will change. Whoever wins the White House, whoever wins the Senate and the House, I think that in fact there will be an agreement reached. It may not be until February, and the initial agreement may just be to kick the can down the road. But I am optimistic that you're not going to see sequestration actually kicking in.
So when companies are considering the Warren Act and whether they should give notice to employees, what do you think? Should they be doing that or not?
I see no reason for a company to say that they have to give federal Warren Act notice. That is to say, there's no company that's going to know next month in November that 60 days later a particular plant is going to be closed or a particular group of employees is going to be laid off. So I can't imagine they would need to do that.
Well, it's very tough because they've got to forecast, haven't they? I mean,
right.
Government doesn't have to, but companies do.
But it's only 60 days, and I think the Department of Labor acted wisely in telling companies that they don't have to issue Warren Act notices. I know people will tell you the Department of Labor doesn't enforce and they're not a party, but the fact is they're speaking and saying companies don't need to issue a Warren Act notices based on a potential for problems, I think was a helpful step.
So our audience should heed that advice.
I would think so.
Dan, with Inside the Beltway, any cocktail party you go to, any association event, any lunch, any dinner, anybody really is talking about sequestration. Maybe that's the excitement of business in this region. But what about outside of this region? How does sequestration impact companies that perhaps aren't government contractors? And what are you seeing and what are you advising?
I would really separate sequestration from the underlying challenge of the deficit. Sequestration is probably not going to happen. We're probably going to reach an agreement eventually. I think the dynamic will be different after the election. But the underlying deficit has to be addressed. And in my opinion, we're going to need to do that through a combination of spending cuts and tax increases. We need both. The two sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, can argue about exactly what the mix should be. But I don't think we'll get to where we need to until both sides agree that we need some of tax increases and spending cuts.
Because the deficit is looming for it and affecting everybody regardless.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and across industries.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm actually optimistic. The fact is that the end of the war in Iraq and the upcoming end of the war in Afghanistan will reduce defense spending significantly. That will give us breathing room. As the economy improves, the government will be getting more taxes because we're going to have more people working, making more money. I think you're going to see that the challenge is not as great as it was during this awful recession, but we're still going to need some flexibility and some pain, frankly, on both sides.
An agreement on what should be cut and what cutbacks we should make where.
Yes.
Dan, sequestration, obviously, as you said, it may not necessarily go through. But regardless, do you think that Congress really is sort of pointing a gun at their own heads? How would you phrase that, and what do you think about that?
It's interesting. I do think that the deficit is so significant that it is causing very painful choices. That part's genuine. But it's unfortunately disguised somewhat or camouflaged or made more complex by an obsession on the part of some to have smaller government. Those two things are combining in an unfortunate way. So instead of a thoughtful process of how do we reduce spending, how do we limit entitlements, how do we increase revenue, you have some, especially in the House of Representatives, frankly, who just want to slash and burn government. And the combination of those two is what's created this self-inflicted wound. We need to get past that. I'm pretty optimistic that we will, but it's going to be a challenge.
And it depends on who's making that analysis anyway. They'll make choices depending on their own political base and their political beliefs.
Absolutely. I am hopeful that whoever wins the White House, you will see more flexibility all around to solve the problems because we know what to do. We need some sort of a grand bargain. We might need a statute passed to postpone the sequestration by 3 months, 6 months, or maybe even a year. But I'm fairly optimistic that we will be able to reach agreement. There are enough reasonable people in both parties, in both houses, and in the White House, whoever wins in the White House, that we'll be able to reach agreement.
Well, that's good, Dan, because I think our audiences would like to hear that. Optimistic. And you're very realistic. I mean, this is not coming off the top of your head. You're working with a lot of contractors. You're privy to policy.
Absolutely.
You've been in the White House. You're very erudite on this issue. So thank you for that optimistic view. Dan, our audience is filled with government contractors, subs, primes, small, large. What should the prudent government contractor be doing right now in terms of planning, forecasting and preparing in this era of uncertainty?
I'll tell you, I think that a good contractor will continue doing what a good contractor always does, focusing on the needs of the customer, being sure that they're providing the government what it needs at a good price, so the government's getting best value.
Always, and for the taxpayer, because that's what the government wants. Yes, that's what we want, actually, isn't
Those
it, as
things
well?
don't change. Those things don't change.
They've got to sharpen the saw, though, and focus on those issues.
Absolutely. Price is going to be more important than ever. The government needs to be sure that it's spending taxpayer dollars well. That doesn't mean that the government should be focused on, as we say in government procurement law, low price, technically acceptable. I think that the government needs to focus on getting the best value for the dollars, which may mean paying less than the lowest price they get, but being sure that the higher price is justified by really good past performance, really good quality.
Yes, and that's price to win.
Absolutely.
Yes. Dan, a lot of people in this region are feeling, I think, what one of my colleagues referred to as the funk that has descended on the region, this sort of pessimism, this impending sequestration, this looming fiscal cliff. But you seem refreshingly optimistic. And unlike a lot of people, I don't feel that you're talking off the top of your head. You have great depth of experience. What are you basing that optimism on? And what are the silver linings that we should all look for so our audience can actually have a better Sunday?
I think that people have come to understand that contractors provide really valuable goods and services to the federal government. I think the days of saying contractors are bad are behind us.
Great.
Not for everybody, not in every case, but I think we've made real progress in getting people to understand that the government can do its job better if it has contractors available that are providing goods, good quality at good prices.
For national security, for many issues that protect us every day.
Across the board, whether it's in a healthcare arena, in our national parks, in the military, across the board. I think there is a real opportunity for us to improve relations between the government and contractors in a recognition of how important each one is to the other.
And this silver lining that you see, do you think that those relationships are moving in the right direction? Is that your belief that you want them to? What indicators do you have about the right direction?
I think that the fight over insourcing and outsourcing has died down, and I think it's good that it's died down. I'll tell you, when I came into the White House, many people thought that we were going to be gung-ho to do massive insourcing. But what I always said was, insourcing is not a goal. There's certain things that need to be insourced where we outsourced inherently governmental functions, and we did sometimes do that. But for the most part, we've limited the amount of insourcing that needed to be done. We've limited the amount of insourcing that we actually did. And I think that battle has actually calmed down, and that's a good thing.
That's beneficial in terms of jobs. That's beneficial in terms of what everybody wants for the economy as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And speaking of the economy, and with next year, 2013 is not far off now. What is your prediction for next year, economically and particularly in the government contracting arena?
It's a very important question for contractors. Washington is the center of that industry for the whole country. And we have in Northern Virginia, in the district, and in Maryland, an enormous number of people who work for government contractors.
And not just the contractors, the ripple effect, all the service industries, yeah.
Absolutely. The fact is that spending on contracts increased about 12% a year from 2000 until 2008. Until we got above $540 billion. We got to about $550 billion a year. We leveled that amount off so that it's a bit lower now. It's somewhere under $540 billion. I would expect that number to go down somewhat, largely because of the end of the war in Iraq and the impending end of the war in Afghanistan. But I would not expect that number to drop dramatically. I think you're going to see more stability, which is probably good for industry and good for the government.
Both. And that $500 billion, if it still levels out around there, that's still far greater than it was $200 billion in 2000.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's still a vast amount of money being spent in.
Even if we went back 5 years in time, you would still have something, you would have above $300 billion a year being spent, and our economy Our contractors were doing very well 5 or 6 years ago.
Yes. Dan, while you were in the White House, many members of our audience might have heard of your Mythbusters campaign that you actually instituted. Could you share with our audience what was that campaign and how now is that continuing and how does that affect government contractors today?
It's directly relevant to contractors, Hillary. We heard again and again, especially from the people in government contracting shops, that is to say contracting officers, contract specialists, they felt that they shouldn't be talking to contractors. They thought that it was improper. They thought that they would get in trouble. They were worried about GAO investigations or inspectors general reports. We said to them in the Mythbusters memo, we said, it's a myth. You are allowed to meet with contractors, you're allowed to meet with vendors, and in fact, especially when it's at the stage of figuring out what you need.
Collaboration is good. Communication is good.
Absolutely. When you're defining your requirements, especially in the IT space, but in lots of other areas as well, talking with industry before you put together your final solicitation is a very good thing. The government wins, industry wins. It's a benefit all round. There were a series of other myths that we addressed, but the basic point was more communication between the government and industry is a good thing. It's not prohibited. You're not violating the law. You're not going to get in trouble for doing it. That's a myth. You want to look for ways to increase communication.
So really that freed up procurement officers so they felt more able to have a dialogue with contractors, and that's been beneficial for the taxpayer too, because you want everybody to work together to get the best solution at the most reasonable price.
I'm laughing only because it assumes that we succeeded. What we said, though, on
Made things
day
better.
one,
How about that?
We said on day one, we said, this is a cultural change. This is not a change that's going to happen overnight. We're going to need to keep pushing and pushing, and I'm pleased that my successor as Administrator for Federal Procurement Policy, Joe Jordan, and my other former colleagues in the White House are continuing to push to increase communication with industry. Everybody wins when we have more communication.
So it's win-win, and it is continuing in a right kind of track and direction.
Yes.
Good. Well, kudos to Dan for actually initiating that and instituting it. Dan, many of our viewers may know that when you were in the White House, you were actually an advocate for a reduction in the use of cost reimbursement contracts. Do you still agree with that? Because there's been a lot of pushback from industry, not to put you on the spot, but where do you think that stands today?
I'll tell you, Hillary, we saw the cost reimbursement issue as one of 4 examples of high-risk contracts that we wanted to drive down. One of them was sole source contracts. The fact is, when the government awards without a competition, we're in a very high-risk situation. So that was actually
not as competitive, anywhere near as competitive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was a very high priority for us. A second one was the situation where the government runs a competition, but they only get one bid. We view that as high risk. The third was the use of time and materials contracts, where the government pays the contractor but may not get what it's looking for because the government's essentially paying by the hour and not by the delivered goods or services.
And there's actually there is an incentive for the contractor to sort of run on and run up the hours.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Cost reimbursement was the fourth. And in my view, and in the view of many people around our community, both on the government side and in private industry, cost reimbursement is the most subtle of the 4 because there are actually situations where cost reimbursement is not high risk. When you're doing research and development, R&D work, it's often more sensible and safer to use a cost reimbursement mechanism. If you try to buy R&D work on a fixed price basis, as many of my older friends tell me we tried to do in the 1980s, the result can be a huge waste of public funds.
And particularly in the healthcare arena. Dan, there's been a lot of emphasis and actually a sort of calling for procurement reform. What do you see that's on the horizon, and what do you advocate that could be reformed to the benefit of government contractors, of course the government and the taxpayer, so it's a win-win situation?
It's interesting, Hillary. When I began in November 2009, I said that I didn't think we need to change the laws about government procurement. On the contrary, I worry that we change the laws too often and it confuses everybody, the government and contractors. My focus was on improving the way we run things, implementation, if you will. We were trying to strengthen the federal acquisition workforce. We were trying to get the government to buy smarter. We were trying to improve training. There are on the horizon now some ideas on the Hill to improve acquisition laws, especially in the area of IT acquisition. I know that Chairman Issa is considering introducing a bill. We recently had a program at GW Law School in which we had an open forum discussing the draft bill from Chairman Issa's office.
And he's reached across the aisle as well, I understand, which is unusual.
I have to tell you, it's one of the great things about this area. It is often bipartisan,
yes.
and it's good when it is bipartisan. To give you an example, at that forum, that recent forum at GW Law School, we had staffers from the Democratic side and the Republican side. We had staffers from the House and from the Senate. It is, that bill includes interesting language. I'm not going to be in the situation of advocating. It's really not my job.
But it's a better step, people say.
It's certainly
in the right
worth
direction.
thinking about. It's certainly worth thinking about. Where are the areas where legislative action may be helpful? I tend not to be an advocate of it. I tend to view it as more important to improve practices than the rules, because I think the rules are reasonably good, but I am open to the idea of improving the laws where it makes sense, as long as all of the stakeholders get a chance to express their views, get listened to, so we're not ramming a new statute down somebody's throat without careful and full discussion.
And involving also the marketplace, so government contractors have a voice in this process.
Absolutely.
And simplification, we don't need more complexity.
Absolutely. Simplification is good.
Dan, there's been quite a bit of pressure from the Hill to have some companies suspended or debarred. Do you see debarment as a trend, and is that something that you see that is impacting contractors today?
It's interesting. It's one of these questions, Hillary, where it's important to step back and look at the big picture. The fact is the vast majority of contractors are good. They do good work. They provide good quality. They're not candidates for suspension or debarment. The very small minority of contractors that do run into problems should be looked into. But the issue isn't, do we need to suspend or debar companies automatically, which is unfortunately what some people would advocate as the solution. If they have a tax debt, they should automatically be suspended. If they ever got involved in a felony, or at least in the past X years, they should be automatically debarred. What I think we need to do is to be sure that we have at each agency people who look, who check, where there's a problem that arises, they do a review, they listen to the company. We call it due process, right? Mm-hmm. The company gets to explain its situation. The issue shouldn't be, let's punish companies for things they did in the past. The focus should be, is the company now one the government can safely do business with? If we take that approach, I think we can move forward in a healthy way, not by automatically suspending or debarring, but by being sure that we check to protect the public fisc.
Yeah, we're protecting the public first, but it sounds more contractor friendly.
I think it's more fair. That's the American way.
Right. Dan, everybody watching today obviously is interested in winning a government contract. So they're interested in where may there be growth. Where do you see that there are some growth opportunities so that if they have the expertise, if they have the track record, they might be able to focus there? What's your advice to our audience?
There are some areas that are definitely growth areas. IT has been important and it's going to continue to be important. That's the IT hardware, services, software. The fact is we spend well over $75 billion a year. I would not expect that amount to shrink dramatically. Mm-hmm. The government's going to need IT.
And IT's grown a lot in healthcare. Any other particular industries of IT?
Actually, healthcare itself was going to be the next one I was going to name. It's a very broad area. It goes beyond IT, and I think healthcare will be a growth area. But there are other areas. Defense is going to continue to be extremely important. We have a lot of contractors. Cybersecurity is an area that we at GW University and within the university at the law school have become very focused on. Cybersecurity is important and will continue to be important. I would definitely flag it as a growth area for the government. But the bottom line is what we said early on in our discussion, and that is when a contractor provides services or goods to the government, the number one thing is they need to be sure to follow the rules. Yeah. But the substantive point is, the number two thing, if you will, is they need to be sure that they're meeting the customer's needs at the best price that they can with the highest quality that they can provide.
Right. Thank you, Dan. Dan has shared with us, of course, you must make sure you're compliant. You must be providing a great value for service at the right price. Dan, I think that your experience both in the White House and now at George Washington has been very beneficial because our audience has heard both sides of that sort of equation. So thank you very much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure, Hillary. Thank you.
Did you know that business developers and capture managers are most often right brain dominant, while proposal managers and program managers are most often left brain dominant? Do you know how to tell the difference?
And this question was from Bill in Olney, Maryland, and Bill asks me, the recent emphasis on budget reductions could be seen as a driver towards LPTA, and that's low price, technically acceptable. But one could also argue that buying value rather than low price provides the lowest life cycle cost and the best serves the government's needs. He asks, how do you think this issue will resolve itself and over what period of time?
Hillary, I think it's always true that the government, and by that I mean the specific people evaluating the proposals and making the selection decision, they will get what they want. And what they want will depend on two things. First, direction from their management. And second, because they're humans and make decisions in the messy way that humans do, what they want will be affected by what they personally think they need to do their jobs properly. The degree that these two sets of criteria differ is directly proportional to the stress felt by the government employees, which often also translates into the length of time needed to make and announce the selection decision. So with regard to your question about LPTA, low price, technically acceptable, and value pricing, it's a matter of balancing the reality of the situation as seen by the decision makers and influencers, and whether they are driven more by long-term or short-term factors.
Well, we heard from Dan Gordon, a great professor, leading professor at George Washington Law School here in DC. Not only predictions for this region, predictions for the nation and what's going to happen in 2013 due to what's happening in the election and what we think is going to happen on Tuesday. Well, look forward to joining you next week and we'll know a lot more about 2013 then.
You've been watching Government Contracting Weekly, sponsored each week by AOC Key Solutions Incorporated. Government Contracting Weekly is the only television program devoted exclusively to the competitive and dynamic world of government contracting. For additional information, comments, questions, or suggestions, please write us at governmentcontractingweekly.com.